Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's the CoreNet Mid-Atlantic chapter for our event this afternoon. We're talking today about the power of place, cultivating culture with a hybrid workforce. My name is Megan Lance, and I'm the secretary on the exec committee and vice president with HIT Contracting. I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you to our education committee, who spent a lot of time putting this program together, and I'm sure you'll find it very valuable. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to our 2021 chapter sponsors. It's been a tough year, and the chapter would definitely not be where we are today without all of your support, so thank you. If you're interested in becoming a chapter sponsor, please reach out to us today. We are closing our sponsorship drive next week on February 15th. I just wanted to share a quick housekeeping item. Our speakers are happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation. If you notice the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page, click and share any of your questions in there. And as we wrap up the program, we'll try to address as many questions as possible. So we know the pandemic has provided unprecedented challenges and opportunities. As professionals, we're navigating this uncharted territory and trying to find ways to make an impact. So today we're going to talk about findings based on extensive research, as well as the corporate real estate executives' observations and experiences. So we'll definitely get an understanding of the underpinnings of culture, and we'll see how it's also partnered really with that power of place. So it's definitely my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We've got Dr. Tracy Brower, PhD sociologist and a principal with Steelcase's Applied Research and Consulting Group. She studies the sociology of work and the changing nature of work, workers, and workplace. She's the author of a new book, The Secrets to Happiness at Work, and also Bring Work to Life by Bringing Life to Work. She's also a contributor to Forbes.com and Fast Company. We also have Brian Dean, who's a vice president of T. Rowe Price. He's head of corporate real estate and workplace services and leads a global team of professionals that provide real estate and workplace strategy, workplace solutions, workplace services, property management, and construction and project management to a population of 7,500 housed in over 2.4 million square feet of space across 24 offices worldwide. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brian to kick it off.
And thanks so much, Megan. And hello, everyone. And thank you for joining today. Right, just to set the stage for today's conversation, right? If your experience is anything like mine and that of my team here at T. Rowe, you've thought a lot about the pandemic and probably in three waves, right? First, we had the need to stand up support for 98% of our workforce working entirely remotely, as well as ensuring the safety of our essential on-site personnel. Secondly, came the preparation of our offices for the safe return of our associates, right, which experienced certainly many fits and starts across the globe. And now we are helping our organizations understand the future of work and workplace. And while the two waves were incredibly challenging and organizations relied on us to do them well, we can make a long and lasting impact with the guidance we now are being asked to provide. So in addition to talking about the impacts of real estate footprint and how our workplaces will be reconfigured in the future, our call to action is really to speak about the power of place and its ability to provide more value than ever before, right? So this is why I've been looking forward to today's conversation and session. And so Tracy, again, welcome. Thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us. And I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks to the Education Committee and CoreNet Mid-Atlantic for having us. We really appreciate it and can't wait for the dialogue with you, Brian. I love your opening remarks about this opportunity for us to really have influence and impact and do some really, really exciting things. And that actually is a perfect segue. I want to start with a little story. Heaven forbid, I won't tell you a joke, I promise, but I will tell you about an old joke. There's a city slicker and he's trying to find his way somewhere, and he gets lost in the countryside, hopelessly lost, and he runs into a farmer. He stops the farmer and flags him down and says, "Hey, can you help me get to, my destination?" And the farmer says to him, "Well, if you want to go there, I wouldn't start from here." I just love that. I think it's such an analogy for where we are in this pandemic. And it's such an interesting time of year because we can look back and go, last Valentine's Day, I had a normal dinner with my husband, and little did we know that everything was going to be changing. So we've all been through this crazy year, whatever our circumstances are. And surely this isn't what we would have hoped for ourselves. But we can go to some really, really interesting new places. We can have influence and impact in lots of places, and that's what we want to talk a little bit about today, because our opportunity to influence culture, organizational results, the experience we're creating for people is really, really unprecedented. So we have done some amazing research in terms of multiple studies, no less than 32,000 touch points, and we'll share some of that with you. But we also are going to ask for some of your impressions through this experience as well, and Brian will share some of his firsthand knowledge. We are anticipating that this is going to be the most significant reinvention of work in our experience. You know, in our industry, we've had so many conversations over the years about getting on the radar screen and, you know, having senior leaders really pay attention to work experience and workplace and making sure that this is something that we're all thinking about front and center. And workplace and work experience are having a moment. The really interesting thing that's going on right now is we're thinking consciously, more consciously than we ever have, about our work processes, our work colleagues whom we're missing, our workplaces. And through its absence, we are so appreciating the workplace and also all the things that our cultures offer us and all that we've learned about our cultures and all that we want to get back to in terms of those. So we have this experience, not just to get back to where we were thinking we were going, but maybe even to accelerate. I had a wonderful conversation with the head of emerging technology for the Consumer Electronics Association. They're the ones that run the Consumer Electronics Show, which is usually in Vegas every year. And he talked about technology on the horizon. And he said, it's not that there's so much brand new technology, it's that our openness, our acceptance levels have expanded, and we have a new perspective on what we might be able to embrace. And I think we can think about workplace and work experience in that way as well. We may be able to go to some really new places. So with that, we would like to ask you a question, get started right away on this one. So I think Emily's going to pull up our poll and you will have the opportunity to respond to it. Here's the question. You can respond whenever you're ready. When you get back to the office in a more consistent way, we know some of you have people who are there now who may not have left, or some who are getting back. But when you get back, kind of in a more consistent way, to what extent do you expect to leverage a hybrid model? Minimally, you don't really expect so much and you think people will work from home 1 day a week or less. Moderately, you expect people to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. Significantly, you expect people to work from home 4 or 5 days a week, or maximally, you're expecting people will work from home the majority of the time. I think this is such an interesting one. So as you're answering, we have seen such an ebb and flow in the media. You know, at the very beginning, we heard all these companies saying, you know, we figured out we can just work from home, and who needed an office anyway? And now we're really, really seeing that honeymoon period of a home office time is starting to relax, and many people are hitting a wall in terms of home office. And while there are things that we love, there are also things that we're not so crazy about. So Emily, if we want to bring up the results, that would be awesome. And we can kind of see where people are hitting. Oh, look at this. If we turn it on its side, it's a perfect bell-shaped graph. It looks like most of you are saying moderately, 2 or 3 days a week for people, with 73%. That's terrific. Thank you for that. It's a really, really great echo, actually, of what we saw in our global data. So when we look at our global data, we found that there are actually 72% of people who expect to come back in a hybrid kind of setting, and 23% who expect to be primarily in the office. And so this is important to us because we expect more flexibility. Many companies that didn't allow working from home are increasingly allowing working from home or expecting to. In fact, 87% of business leaders are saying they expect a great degree of flexibility. But one of the things that we want to really think about is how do we nurture culture in that? And Cheryl gets all the credit for this idea of the language that we use. there's a wonderful concept called linguistic determinism. The idea that you should never call yourself anything but what you want to be. The idea that our language is really shaping in terms of how we think about people and situations and experiences. And if we think of people as remote, they may be working in a remote location, but we wouldn't want them to be remote as team members. So later on, we're going to ask you, what are the alternatives to that word remote? What are the ways that we can think about our language, and how do we bring some new meaning to that? So takeaway message, hybrid is probably here to stay. We want to make sure that we create cultures that are inclusive of a holistic work experience, and we want to think about how we really nurture people and the results that they will drive. So let's talk a minute about culture. We want to get into hybrid culture. And so you all know culture is the norms and assumptions and values. It's our shared belief systems. But a couple of things you might not have heard culture before. The way things get done around here is one that I really like, or what people do when no one's looking. Those are the things that are embedded in terms of our cultural experience. Here's something really cool. From a neuroscience perspective, you don't feel a sense of belonging just from being with other people. You feel a sense of belonging when you have shared identity. And culture is like that as well. It's interesting, too, to think about the leadership paradox. When leaders are leading, they tend to create a culture in their own image. And so you can have microcultures that are based on a leader's leadership style. But at the same time, culture tends to be long-term, and it tends to be more long-lasting over time, regardless of leaders. That's the paradox. It's extraordinarily shaped by leaders, and it's extraordinarily long-lasting, regardless of leaders. The thing that's important for us is that leadership matters, place matters, process matters, tools and technology matter. And so we have a lot of levers we can pull, and that will be our opportunity as we think about culture and how important it is and how critical we are in that equation. So Brian, you've been thinking a lot about this as well, and would love your perspective on culture and place and how they start to.
Oh, did we lose your, just a voice check here. Can we hear you? Do we have you, Tracy? Hang on one sec while we try and get Tracy's audio back. No, you're on mute now, Tracy.
Can you hear me?
Ah, there you are.
Can you hear me, Brian?
Yeah.
Can you? Okay, good. So you probably had some brilliant things to say. Are you finished? I'm so sorry to break in on you.
No, we were just waiting for you to come back. So, all right. So just back on track with culture, and perhaps we'll get to some technology requirements in the future hybrid workforce as well. You know, for T-Row and culture, right? So as illustration, right? And I think other companies are experiencing and working through, you know, similar issues, right? You know, what we found early on, right, is that remote work was shockingly successful, right? You know, for us, you know, our trades were executed, our operations teams managed the volumes, you know, investors and our relationship managers, you know, carried out client interactions, right? But despite this, right, despite what we were hearing, you know, our senior leadership was very eager to get our people back into the office as soon as possible, right? And our initial kind of return was back in the summer timeframe, right? And it really felt like we were out in front of many other organizations in this regard, right? But I would say that it was driven, and it was indicative of the cultural fabric of our firm, right? Which is really centered on collaboration, consensus building, and fostered by mentoring and relationships, right? And it's for these same reasons that our leaders are really struggling with the thought of a hybrid workforce, not to mention introducing strategies like free address and mobility. Right. So Tracy, I'll hand it back to you and for you to kind of talk us through kind of what we should be thinking about cultural issues in a hybrid environment.
Yeah, I love your point, Brian. I'm so sorry about my technology issues. I don't know what to blame it on. We're having a bit of a snowstorm in Michigan, so maybe I can go there. I love your point, Brian, about, the explicit value of collaboration and consensus and mentoring and relationship building. That's a really important part of culture. A lot of times our language of business is financial, well, how's the balance sheet? And well, gosh, I don't know if that was a great investment of my time. And I'm not sure that's going to pay off. Our language tends to be that of finance. And the more we can make our language that of culture, the better. You can think about culture as an iceberg where a lot of it is under the surface. You can't see it. It's palpable, but you can't see it. And so the more we raise it to the surface, and to your point, Brian, talk about it explicitly, talk about what we value, talk about the behaviors that we want to see, that can be very powerful. And we know that culture has a huge impact. It's funny, I remember 20 years ago talking to business leaders, gosh, that sounds like a long time, 20 years ago talking to business leaders, and they were saying, but isn't culture fluffy, Tracy? And we said, no, it's not fluffy at all. And today we have business leaders saying it's critical, we get it. Now, how do we connect the dots between place and culture in particular? We know that when we have stronger cultures, we see better attraction, retention, commitment, engagement. We see better ROI, ROE, customer satisfaction. That is borne out in literature from Cotter and Heskett, which is seminal, borne out in literature from Dennison, which is ongoing. The other thing that's interesting is that culture is never a one-size-fits-all. My ideal culture may surely not be yours, and vice versa. So for us to be really mindful of what it is that we value and what our fit is makes a really big difference. I love this. The credit on this one goes to either Cheryl or Nicole. I'm not sure who said it in our call, but I thought it was brilliant. How can you live your culture if you don't live in your culture? We know that culture is something that is both pragmatic and ethereal. It's something that you experience even if you're not in the office. And I like to say that culture has been doing really hard work lately. When you're in the office, you can kind of tune in. A colleague of mine likes to say you can hear the birds singing. You can kind of tune in. You can hear it in the elevator lobby. You can run into somebody in the work cafe. But when you're in your home office, you don't get as many of those interstitial moments, those moments in between other moments. And so culture is the thing that guides our decision-making, guides our interactions. And living in our culture when we're face-to-face is so powerful and a really, really important kind of part of what we're really experiencing. One of the things that we know is that business leaders are really struggling. There's a wonderful survey that was done by the Society for Human Resource Management. It found that 2/3 of companies and business leaders are struggling to maintain morale in the face of everybody having gone home, quote unquote. And 1/3 of them are struggling to maintain their culture. At an individual level, in a separate study done by Qualtrics, 75% of people were experiencing social isolation. And their amount of social isolation was exactly correlated to how much work they were doing in their home office. We're seeing our closest people all the time. We are absolutely staying connected to those primary networks and those intimate relationships. But we are missing out on the relationships with our secondary and our tertiary networks, and our social capital is melting. Or you can think about social capital as a bank balance where we're making withdrawals because we're not seeing each other face to face, which is when we make more of our deposits. All of that is critical to culture because culture is something we experience with our colleagues, it's something we experience in teams, and it's something we very much experience locally in terms of the work that we're doing for our organizations. Work from home is a mixed bag. As we think about culture, part of what we're experiencing is in our home offices now. And so people loved that there was no commute. They loved less distraction depending on their life stage, but they were less crazy about that feeling of isolation, less crazy about the feeling that decision-making was slower. And so this is important to us because this creates a case for coming back. It also creates a case for what are we learning about our experience from home that we want to enrich the work experience that we create for people on an ongoing basis. And Brian, I know you've been really tuning into your workforce and really doing a lot of listening about people's experience. So weigh in for us on this one. What are you seeing in terms of working from home and the way people are experiencing their cultures?
Yeah, and we've surveyed our associates twice so far during the pandemic. The first time in April and then again in June, and with each 70 to 80% response rates respectively. So people really had an opinion and wanted it to be heard, right? And the two big issues that were revealed in the first survey was the need for information, right? So not surprisingly, right, we were just in the early stages of work from home, and really what people wanted is what was going on across the firm, right? They used to see it and walk the halls and hear it and talk to more people, interact with more people, on a casual basis, right? So, we had to stand up, town halls and all hands sessions, and clearly a big driver of Zoom fatigue came out of the response to some of that finding, but. The second thing was, again, not surprising, was the need for more resources to be productive at home, related to technology and other equipment, as well as support for, childcare, elder care, things of that sort as well. And the second survey, right, was a little bit of a shift, right? It confirmed that our associates were feeling productive and appreciating the flexibility that was offered. And this is when we were just getting the first signs that our associates were looking for more flexibility on a permanent basis, right? So that started to come through, kind of mid-year for us, right? And so, Tracy, I think you have more recent research. So what does this tell us?
That's fascinating, Brian. I love your point about people wanting information. One of the things we've seen sociologically is that in so much change, in the midst of everything turning upside down, people tend to look to their company as the single source of information, quote unquote. So all this is coming at us and we're looking to our companies to say, okay, what do I need to pay attention to? What does this mean to us? What does this mean to me and my role? So I love your point, and about resources as well. And just that flexibility, we're hearing so much about people who want more flexibility and companies who are saying, we're going to plan to give it to you because we're realizing the value of it. One of the things we're also seeing is expanded expectations from employees. People want safety. I mean, pre-pandemic, we all worked in safe offices. Probably none of us spent too much time thinking about if we were clean and safe in our office. I'm a germphobe, and I didn't even spend too much time thinking about that. But we have new levels of acceptability in terms of safety, in terms of not just cleanliness and facility circulation patterns and geometry and density, but also in terms of psychological safety. We've got some new expectations. But in addition to that, it's all about belonging. People want to be with their people, and people want to be productive. One of the things when we ask people going through change management, they say is the number one thing is, please don't do anything that's going to get in the way of my performance. I've got tons of responsibilities and things I need to follow through on. Please don't limit that. And so as people look at getting back to a work experience that's really rich, they want that productivity and that support for all kinds of working, whether it's collaborative or focused work. And they want comfort and control. One of the things people love about home offices is being able to control more in some cases, right? Like I can have that amazing array of settings from my dining room table to my kitchen island to my living room couch. But I haven't necessarily been super comfortable. So while I love the dining room set I've got and it's comfortable for that hour-long meal, it's not so great 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. So these are some of the expectations that people have in terms of when they return and what they're going to want from that bigger picture work experience inside the office and out. So Brian, you've got some perspectives on some of these new expectations as well. What are you seeing?
Yeah, probably a couple points here to share, right? And so we've recently announced that we'll be relocating our headquarters in 2024, and part of this will be building a couple new buildings, right? And so as part of the early planning, we're conducting a listening tour with our senior leadership, and what we're consistently hearing is that while deep thought, and concentrative work continues to be really important, especially for our investors and our research analysts and certain roles, right? The new and clear desire, right, is to allow collaboration to happen easily, often in formal and informal ways, right? And in varied types of spaces, right? From open to close, large and small, right? And just as importantly, right, is the ability to digitally connect in a very easy way with those that won't be on site, right? It's the recognition that everybody's not going to be in the same room anymore, right? And so how do we make those experiences, those interactions, like or closely resemble being in the same space? Right. And secondly, and truly, in the context of what you said earlier, right, culture is not a one size fits all. We're doing some really interesting work right now and working with a third party to do this, right? And it's really to define what the hybrid work force and workplace means, specifically to TRO, what will be uniquely TRO about it. Right. And so we know that our culture has to evolve, right? And so we've just gone through a from and to exercise, working in teams and identifying behaviors that exist in our culture today, such as recognition, risk-taking, courageousness, making exceptions, inclusiveness, fear, right? Range of, we have pages full of behaviors that people have said exist in today's environment. And really what we wanted to do was be clear about which of these behaviors needed to stop, right? In a hybrid environment, right? What did we need to keep? What did we make sure couldn't go away or couldn't change? Right? And what did we need to do more of, right? So we've just completed that work. We haven't really done the analysis there, but the next step in that work is going to be talking about, enablers to make those things happen or blockers, right? And so it's a really thoughtful approach of defining what is uniquely TRO, what will be uniquely TRO about a hybrid culture, right? So I'll hand it back over to you, right? And for you to share kind of how this aligns with the research that you've done.
Oh, I love that, Brian. We always say that you're not really managing a culture as a monolith. You're managing behavior. You're encouraging, discouraging, selecting toward behavior or away from behavior. And we always say place shapes behavior, and behavior over time is culture. So I love that explicitness around those behaviors that you want to see more of, and what you're, starting and stopping and continuing. That's not the language you used, but it's kind of that idea in terms of what we really want to see and how that's unique to TRO. So cool. So a lot of what you also talked about, Brian, was kind of this idea of presence equity or presence disparity. That is about collaborating and how we collaborate in a hybrid model, regardless of where we're coming in from. Proximity, sociologically speaking, is one of the #1 determinants of relationship. The people that we see more, the people with whom we have more contact and more familiarity tend to be the people with whom we have the strongest relationships, and we tend to build greater acceptance. And it makes sense, right? Like if you see somebody a whole bunch, you kind of start to get them. They've got their weird sense of humor, or they've got their up days or their down days, or they've got their motivations. You kind of just start to get people. And so sociologically, the more we see something, the more we're likely to accept it. That works with everything from music to stars on television or movies to coworkers. There's another piece of research that's really cool here and is so shaping in terms of our experience of culture. There was this wonderful research effort that was done where people were asked to collaborate with others in their company. And they were asked to collaborate with people who were across the building, who were across the nation, or who were across the globe. And in that collaborative effort, they measured follow-up, follow-through, and kind of completion of tasks along with colleagues, and found perfect correlation between physical distance and follow-up and follow-through. So when people were closer, i.e. across a building or across a nation, they tended to have better follow-up and follow-through than if they were farther away, i.e. globally. It was perfectly correlated. The trick in the research is that everyone was sitting in conference rooms next to each other and they didn't know it. Proximity was completely about perception. And so what we're trying to do in all of this is to create a perception of proximity. We can think about this as affinity distance. This is how close you feel to your colleagues. So if we can create cultures where we have a sense of proximity, it gives us a really, really important kind of follow through in terms of the way performance is impacted. The other thing about proximity is that when we're together face to face and when we see each other more often, we can get in sync more effectively. Our brain science suggests that not only do we need other people in terms of our health and well-being physiologically and emotionally, but we also will get in sync more effectively. And so proximity can be either real or perceived, and our opportunity with a hybrid culture, when everybody isn't together all the time, is to create the conditions that create that sense of proximity. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But your point, Brian, about how we come together, the other thing to think about is we used to have so much presence disparity, right? Like everybody in the meeting kind of got an advantage over the couple of people who might have been remote that day. And since we're all remote, we get this new sense of presence equity. We're all on the screen. And when we go back to hybrid, we're going to have to bring in more of that presence equity and really learn how to nurture and cultivate that presence equity. I love this. Culture occurs within buildings and beyond buildings. And this is about destination on steroids. I was talking to a leader recently and she said, we surveyed our people and they really, really want to work from home. And now what do we do? And so as leaders, one of the first things they want to do is create a place that people want to be, a magnet, a destination. There's a lot of other things too, but that's probably step one. So Brian, what's your perspective on this, on place as a destination, on creating senses of proximity, on all of this?
Well, this is really difficult, right? But I would say that we're kind of early in the journey, right? We're kind of rallying around this idea of, if people don't have to come into the office every day, what's going to make them want to come into the office, right? And it's all about kind of having it be easy, right? Intuitive. And easy across a range of things, right? In terms of, getting to the office, parking, getting in the building, getting to a space, whether that's assigned or unassigned, right? Getting the services that help people be productive, and that remove friction from getting work done, right? So there's technology. Right. I spoke earlier about kind of making technology easy to use, one click and consumer oriented, right? That has to make its way into kind of the corporate workplace, right? More so than ever before. You've talked about presence equity, which I really liked. We've talked about digital equity, right? So how do we make sure that, those in the room aren't perceived differently than those that are dialed in, right? The joke is that, when people do return to the office, everybody's going to still kind of zoom into meetings, even if they're in the same room. And so they're all in their windows, right? Because that creates kind of equity, right? We've seen new voices, we've heard new voices emerge in the firm, because of that perceived equity. So early on in our journey, right? But so those are some of the things that we are, discussing, thinking about, and learning more about.
Oh, I love your point about friction. I love your point about convenience and about people being kind of inspired to get there. I love the concept of satisfiers and motivators as we think about culture. And I think some of your remarks kind of point to this. Herzberg was a classic sociologist, and he actually studied compensation and said compensation is just a satisfier. It's like a really, really great meal. You go out for dinner on Friday night, you leave the restaurant and you say, that's the best meal I ever had in my whole life. I never need to eat again. But then Sunday morning rolls around and you're ready for an omelet. He said that is like compensation. That is like a satisfier where we've got to have levels of convenience, and we've got to have the absence of friction. People have gotten entrenched in their home offices, and we need to have them come over the threshold to come back to the workplace for many of them, the ones who have left. But beyond the satisfiers, we want motivators as well. The things that will not just make it convenient, but will make us want to get up and out of bed in the morning. The things that will inspire us, which are the projects that have meaning and the people that we want to connect with and our colleagues. And to your point, Brian, the relationships and the mentorship and the relationships that people are building in terms of the collaboration that they're doing. So I love your points, and I think that they're so related to that idea of satisfiers and motivators, both of which we need to pay attention to in a hybrid model. So how do we create this hybrid culture? And a really big part of it is shared purpose. Harvard has done some really seminal research on the things that separate companies who fail from companies who survive and thrive is a really important shared sense of purpose. And when we're together in place, we get that so much more. We get shared dependencies, which are really important to us. When we build culture, we need to make sure that we are being fair and holding people accountable. We need to build in presence and accessibility, not only of leaders, but also of people to people. And we need to think about transparency of information. So these are some of the ways that we start to build that hybrid culture. And I like to think about it as purpose being really critical. Leaders having really transparent, open relationship where they're setting expectations and giving people a line of sight, both literally and figuratively, and connecting people with each other, not just in Zoom happy hours, God bless Zoom happy hours, but in tasks where we're rolling up our sleeves together and we're really realizing how critical we are to each other. Those are some of the things that will be really important to a hybrid culture, and just people feeling this shared sense of purpose, of camaraderie, and of relationship that will keep that culture really healthy and thriving. So we set the stage for you early in our discussion, and we talked a little bit about linguistic determinism and the importance of language. So back to your awesome thinking, Cheryl, on this. And we'd love for you to enter your thoughts in the chat. So if you go on you're used to the Zoom platform, just put your thoughts in the chat. Considering remote work, what are the ways we could refer to remote in order to be more inclusive or communal or unified? So yeah, remote might be about where you are, but what might we call people who are working someplace else other than remote? So we'd love to hear some of your thinking in this one. And I think, Brian, are you and I both going to kind of look at the chat and see what we see here? I will stop sharing my screen just for a minute so we can look into the chat and see what kinds of ideas people have. You're saying distributed team models. You're saying mobile. I love it. Those are great ideas. What are some of the other ways that you've been thinking about this, Brian? Have you, within your organization, have you started thinking about how you call people? We've talked about distributed collaboration. We've talked about, team members. We've talked about the idea of best place, like you're working in whatever place makes the most sense for your work that day on campus or off. Laura has a great idea, agile workers. Yeah, absolutely. Or Erin is saying flexible. Yeah, I like that. That's really great because adaptability and agile and flexible have connotations to the way that we're working in our work process, and they have a connotation to great personality characteristics where we're adaptable, flexible, resilient kinds of people as well. Brian, any thoughts from you as people are thinking?
Yeah, and I think, these are all great, and so they'll be helpful to me, right, as we continue our work, because I will say that, we're probably not that this far along in terms of determining the language, right? Because we're still trying to break away from kind of the pre-pandemic kind of mentality and perspective, right? Of, what it means to be together, what it means to collaborate, right? So we have to learn how to, allow people to and have people feel comfortable and that they're allowed to and they're empowered to work wherever, right? So, work happens wherever people are, not when they're in the office, right? Or even at home, right? And say you have to think about work anywhere, not just in the office or remote. So we're still trying to, break away from, the old words.
Yeah, I love that. Work happens wherever we are. Work happens anywhere. Lisa, you've got a great idea about resource integration and innovation. So equitable participation, regardless of location. Love that. That's great. Louise is saying free address, not just in the office, but from anywhere. I really like that. It's really fun and interesting. I was doing some research on work life, and we at the time were talking about how children were having this was pre-pandemic, children were having a really hard time understanding what their mom and dad did, or what their significant others did for a living, because work has become so invisible, right? It's so much within our laptops versus being things that we're manipulating. And that one of the interesting things that's happened in the pandemic is all of a sudden our family members can see and hear more of what we're doing. I saw a really funny story from a wife who said, "Oh my gosh, the guy in the meeting who uses all the business jargon, that's my husband. I never knew." But the reason that's important to us is because we get a greater sense of literacy when we're working in multiple places. And when we can bring in collaboration from multiple locations, that's a big deal. And when we understand our work and those around us understand our work, it actually gives us even more meaning and even more purpose. So really, really appreciate it. Gina's saying remotely engaged. Lisa's talking about, social strategies to encourage zip code agnostic behavior. Zip code agnostic, that's nice. I love that. We can talk about that some more in the Q&A probably. Brian, were you going to say something else?
No, I was just going to say, I was going to point that out to make sure you saw it. And do you have any thoughts on social strategies, right, to kind of, support that?
Yeah, I think this is going to be all about new social norms in the environment. Brian, you referred to, like when we're in our meetings, we might all have our screens on. So when people are home or people are in the office, everybody's got a screen. And then we're going to have that funky thing that happens where if you're in the meeting room together, are you looking at your screen? Are you looking at your person near you? We're going to have all those new social systems to get used to. One of the things we've found in terms of all the virtual collaboration is that small talk at the beginning of the meeting becomes even more important than it did before, so that we are grounded together. So I wonder if there are some new social norms about that grounding. We used to call it in the olden days the engagement or the enrollment, where you start the meeting and you kind of enroll people together. There might be some of those new and interesting ways that we do that, or some new and interesting ways that we actually close meetings in order to, kind of close out no matter where you are. So we'd be opening up no matter where you are, closing out no matter where we are. In the meetings, making more room for people who are remote, asking them, or distant or flexible, asking them, pausing, looking for their input, and certainly being sensitive about mics and not, rattling papers in the middle of the meeting that makes it difficult for them to participate. So one more thing about this that's critical. We've been talking about place throughout, but place is a really, really important location that culture plays out. It is how we experience our cultures. And I love to think about it as it's like our five senses. We can see, hear, taste, smell, touch. And without place, it's like losing one of our senses. It's maybe like putting a blindfold on. We can't see and hear the cues around us. Places send us cues about what we value, what we encourage, what kind of behavior goes around here, how much do we support well-being, in what ways do we do private work, how do we collaborate together, what's our level of openness in terms of sharing with each other. The place sends palpable messages about that. And we're seeing some really wonderful new trends in terms of real estate and HR and IT working together almost to a customer. We're hearing that there's this closer relationship between HR, IT, and real estate because of all the technology that's had to come into homes, because of the technology that needs to make those connections seamless, because of the HR policies, practices, and people focus that needs to be on both the culture and the work experience more holistically. And so the place is about cues and nudges. It's about focusing on people and creating experience for them. And it's about making sure that we can get the kind of results that we need. And we know place is fundamental to all of those kinds of things. So with that, I think, Brian, we are ready to really think about more discussion with the people on the phone. This is our moment to accelerate and expand and reinvent. We are on the radar screen in terms of workplace and work experience and real estate and facilities and people. And so we have a moment to kind of take our organizations in some wonderful new places and influence and impact. So we're curious from you all, and you can put this in the chat, in what ways is place important in your organization? And Brian, I know you're going to facilitate us through that conversation. And if we have open Q&A, we can take those questions as well. So let me hand it back to you, Brian, and see if we're starting to see anyone in the chat talking about how place is important in their organization. Or Brian, if we have any early questions that we want to start with in order to kind of get the dialogue going with everybody. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions show up just yet, but why don't you get it started? And do you see what traits of companies are you seeing that are dealing with this or rising from this better than others? Are there any commonality? Is there any commonality between them?
Yeah, boy, that is such an important question right now, isn't it? You know, I think it's all about learning and adapting. I think it's about listening. So the customers and the companies that seem to be really, really doing well are the ones who are super tuned into their markets and their customers, and they're able to really, really be able to not just listen, but then also respond and pivot. So that listening behavior, that learning behavior, that ability to kind of pivot are critical. The other thing that I think is really interesting is just the idea of entrepreneurial types of behavior. Like, we're seeing that as a new skill that people will need at kind of an individual level, a new skill that teams will need to nurture and cultivate. But the organizations that seem to be doing best are the ones who are entrepreneurial. So it's a rare business that hasn't seen some changes, right? Like some businesses have seen a mix shift in their services or their products. Some have seen brand new markets coming to pass. Others have seen markets that are kind of going away. But entrepreneurship is that ability to see those new opportunities and invent and solve problems and respond to the market. And it seems like that at an individual level in terms of employees and at an organizational level in terms of patterns of behaviors are the ones that really, really make a difference. And of course, all that happens best in the physical environment, right? When we can be together and exchange ideas and invent together.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we have a few questions now that I think are really touching on some critical and really important issues. I know that we are thinking about them here at TRO. And Aaron asked the question, how should occupiers be thinking about tech norms with a hybrid workforce, right? 50% in a conference room, 50% at home, right? That's kind of what we've been kind of struggling with in terms of digital equity. And what role does CRE play in changing the behaviors here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Brian, you weigh in on this as well. We've been thinking about tech norms in a number of different ways. We've been thinking about the technology we need to offer people in the short term, existing technology. We've been thinking about new technology and how we need to experiment with it in a very proactive, very planful, very intentional way. We've been thinking about digital becoming part of a meeting experience so that we can offload, cognitively, we can offload some of that experience. So in what ways can technology make things easier for us instead of more difficult for us, which is often the case. And so that might be AR, it might be VR. If we think about AI instead of artificial intelligence, I love to think about augmented intelligence. What are the ways that tech can augment? So it's about what we're offering in the short term. It's about experimenting and maybe giving some of those cutting edge technologies to people so we can learn together. It's about thinking about the digital offload. And I think there's another piece, as long as we're talking about culture, that's all about like norms and behaviors related to technology. Like, how do we give people more permission around technology? How do we give people permission to try the new thing, or to try and fail, or to move to a different location based on the kind of technology that's available? So we have permissions in terms of choices that we give people. In what ways can we think about technology giving people more control versus less control over their schedule? You think about even the technology that helps us with occupancy planning. Like, technology can help us know, are we over occupancy in the short term before we're, super vaccinated? What areas are free? What are busy in terms of my ability to conveniently get into a room or collaborate? I think the last thing I'll say, and then Brian, you weigh in on this one as well, I think that there's this braiding of the digital and the physical that will be so important, so there's more seamlessness, and acoustics will be a really big part of the technology we need to figure out. We are seeing this trend toward people wanting to collaborate more in the open and do focused work more in enclaves. But if we're doing more collaboration in the open, we're going to have to really, really think about acoustics. And that's going to have to do with everything from boundaries to surfaces to new experiments around how acoustics are managed. So I think about that as a technological issue as well, is how we really think about that bigger picture of collaboration and focus and the technology that supports. What do you think, Brian?
Well, what I'm going to do, I do have some thoughts there, but what I want to do is kind of get to a couple other questions, because I think they're really important points, right? And I know for T-Row, right, we've done well in terms of advancing or maintaining our culture in a work from home environment, mostly because of the social capital that's been accrued over many years of being in person and building relationships. But Taylor here kind of says, as a millennial growing in my career, being in the office is critical for me to grow and continue to educate myself. Right. And so how, what should we be thinking about in terms of, new joiners, new employees, right? To kind of give them exposure to more senior employees, and to, ensure mentoring and nurturing and development and coaching all happens, the way that younger professionals or even new professionals, new employees to companies are striving to it. And perhaps,
oh my gosh, that's such
missing.
Yes, exactly. I have so much respect for anybody who's joined a company in the last year. You are climbing a mountain that we all need to learn from. I actually wrote an article on this onboarding during the pandemic, how to give people a running start. And I think one of the things that's going to be so important is intentionality, right? Like, by definition, new employees are not on the radar screen. And so we need to put them on the radar screen. And so I think it's about intentionally connecting people to information, intentionally connecting people to other people, both within their teams and outside of their teams. You thought you did a lot of one-on-ones in the olden days, pre-pandemic, but now we really need to do one-on-ones. So it's about information, it's about people. I think the other thing we need to do in terms of onboarding successfully is being extraordinarily explicit about culture. Like, we don't often talk about culture. What do we value? What goes around here? What can you kind of get away with? What would you never do? Those are the things we should really talk about explicitly. And the other thing we can do is give people who are new lots of PR, because they need to get on the radar screen, and others need to know about them and how to work with them. So leaders and team members can help with that PR. The last thing I'll say is I think a lot of companies want to give people space to learn. Like, there's one company in particular that says, we're not going to give you any projects to do for at least 3 months. You have to just learn. That's all we want you to do. And I love that. I value learning. But what people really want to do is contribute and prove themselves, quote unquote. And that's even more important now. So I think it's a mix of give people space to just learn, which is incredibly important, and give them a moment to jump in and hit the ground running so that they can feel like they're contributing immediately.
That's great. Now we have some other ones here. We'll try and do a little bit of a speed round, but perhaps Tracy, you'll be open to answering some questions offline, because I do think there's some good ones here. But one from Lisa, right, is, do you have a decision-making framework for prioritizing what activities should be done in person versus virtual?
Oh wow, that's a great idea. Yes, we should.
What's going to be left
Yeah,
up?
we should.
versus, right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it probably has to do with, it's probably a 2x2 or a 3x3 or something, right? It probably has to do with the importance of what you're doing, the complexity of what you're doing, and the number of people involved. And so when those are greater, we should do more in person. And when those are more minimal, we could do them by ourselves. There's some third-party research that suggests that home office is great for rote, routine, and alone, but we need to be together for complex problem solving, speed-oriented, and collaborative work.
There's probably an acronym that you can put together for that, isn't it?
That's a great idea. I love that.
Right. So we'll finish up with one more, and that is social media, right? This might in terms of what role, and I think that social media in terms of connecting with large groups of people. What does that play a role in your mind in helping companies work through and be successful with shifting to a hybrid environment?
Yeah, wow, social media. We could talk for hours about that, right? Hopefully everybody's seen The Social Dilemma, or you've read Coddling of the American Mind, which is a brilliant nonpartisan book about how we need to really listen and really learn from differences of opinion. I think the challenge with social media is that social media is like too good. The algorithms are so good that they feed us what we already believe in, what we already know, what we're already paying attention to. And so we end up in echo chambers, or we subscribe to things that we already agree with. But learning and growth and stretch occurs when we hear things that are different than what we already knew and different than what we already agree with. And there's so much value in debate and discussion and dialogue and learning something new. And so I think social media can be an amazing place for us to come together and develop camaraderie and develop that common sense of identity. Hey, we got tons of us who are friends on Facebook from the same company, and we can pile on. That feels really good. And that's all good, and let's keep doing it. And we want to make sure that we're being careful to bring in enough different points of view, and that we're using new technological capabilities, right? Like whether it's GroupMe or WhatsApp or IMing each other, or using different kinds of platforms that are a cultural match. That's probably the bottom line, is making sure it's a match to where we want to go as a culture and where we want to go in terms of our integrity and the ways that we interact with people in our relationships. I love that question. That's a really good one. We got to think about that.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I'll echo what Susan just said, and it's been a very informative. So Tracy, thanks again for being with us, and Megan, I'm going to turn it back to you to wrap us up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I can sure speaking for a lot of people where I absolutely learned a lot. So thank you again very much to Brian and Tracy for being with us today. Tracy's latest article was placed in the chat, so scroll up if you want to download it, or certainly check her work out online. We thank you so much for attending today's event, and please take a look at our growing events calendar. This coming Friday, we do have an event, CoreNet Cafe, featuring end user and board member, CRE Leadership Award recipient, Patrick Flynn from Salesforce. And then additionally, we have a end user dinner roundtable on February 24th. And our next education event will be March 3rd, really looking at a Metro DC real estate market overview. And lastly, if you're new to the chapter, we are hosting a new member orientation. Really important in a virtual world that we connect with each other. We want to make sure that we welcome you. That will be on March 16th. And the last plug I'll make is that we are going to be sending out a survey where we're really looking for your expertise and ideas around really what you want to hear and learn about and how you want to engage with us this year. So keep a lookout for that, and please participate so we can make sure that we're creating content and events for you. So stay tuned for more updates, and we thank you so much for joining us today at the event. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.